The red earth of Burkina Faso trembled beneath the morning sun as Ibrahim Traore stood at the edge of his ancestral land, watching the surveyor's mark slice through the baobab grove where his great-grandfather once held counsel with the spirits. The ancient trees, their massive trunks scarred by centuries of harmattan winds, seemed to whisper warnings in the Moor tongue Entaba, our land, our land. Papa, they say the compensation will make us rich, his daughter Aminata called from behind him, her voice carrying both hope and uncertainty across the dusty compound. At 25 she had studied economics in Ouagadougou and believed in progress, in the promise of development that would lift their people from the margins of the world's attention. But Amadou's weathered hands, shaped by decades of working this soil, clenched into fists. The wind carried the scent of approaching rain, the first of the season, mixed with diesel fumes from the government vehicles that had been circling their village for weeks like vultures around carrion. Money cannot buy the breath of ancestors, my daughter, Ibrahim replied in Moor, his voice deep as the drums that once called warriors to battle. This land remembers. It remembers when the French tried to own our spirits, when they drew their lines across our territories like wounds that never healed. The president's announcement had shocked the world, a mega airport project that would transform Burkina Faso into West Africa's aviation hub, connecting the Sahel to global markets with unprecedented scope and ambition. International investors had praised the vision, development banks had approved massive loans, architectural firms from Dubai and Singapore had submitted gleaming proposals of glass and steel monuments to modernity. But in the villages of Lumbila province, where the earth still held the bones of resistance fighters and the memory of kingdoms that existed before European maps, the project felt like another invasion. Boom beata boom, the sound of traditional drums echoed through Ibrahim's mind, the rhythm of his people's heartbeat, as he remembered his grandfather's stories. The old man had fought alongside the great leaders who resisted colonial conquest, had seen empires rise and fall like seasons, had witnessed the flag ceremonies that promised independence but delivered new forms of dependence. The spirits are restless, whispered Maman Fatou, the village elder and keeper of ancestral wisdom, as she approached with her walking stick tapping against the hardpan earth. Her eyes, clouded with age but sharp with ancient knowledge, surveyed the survey markers with disapproval. They visited me in dreams last night. They showed me machines eating the earth, metal birds bringing not messages of peace but the noise of forgetting. Aminata shifted uncomfortably. She respected the elders, but she also understood the weight of poverty that pressed down on their community like the hot season sun. The airport would bring jobs, she argued, construction work, service positions, opportunities for small businesses. The traditional ways were beautiful, but they wouldn't put her younger brothers through university or bring clean water to every compound. Maman Fatou, Aminata said carefully, using the respectful address for the elder, perhaps the ancestors also want us to prosper? Perhaps they sent this opportunity so our children won't have to leave for Abidjan or Accra to find work. The old woman's laugh was like dry leaves rustling in the wind. Child, prosperity that demands we forget who we are is poverty wearing golden clothes. I have seen many promises from men in suits. They speak of development but bring dependency. They offer progress but deliver displacement. As if summoned by their conversation, a convoy of black SUVs approached along the dirt road, dust clouds announcing the arrival of officials from the capital. The lead vehicle bore the flag of Burkina Faso, red, white and green stripes topped with a golden star, but to the villagers, it might as well have been flying the banner of conquest. The convoy stopped, and out stepped Minister Ouagadougou, the president's chief development officer, a man whose expensive suit and polished shoes marked him as someone who had traveled far from the red earth of his birth. Behind him came representatives from the Chinese Construction Consortium, the European Development Bank, and the American consulting firm, a parade of international interests wrapped in the rhetoric of national progress. Citizens of Lumbila, the minister began in French, his voice amplified by a portable speaker that crackled with static. Today we bring you tremendous news. Your land has been chosen as the site for the most ambitious infrastructure project in our nation's history. The Ouagadougou International Mega Airport will put Burkina Faso on the map as the aviation capital of West Africa. The villagers gathered in a semicircle, their faces expressions of wariness mixed with curiosity. Children peered from behind their mothers' pagnies, their eyes wide at the spectacle of so many foreigners in their quiet community. The adults whispered among themselves in Moor and Fulfulde, a chorus of indigenous languages that the officials couldn't understand but that carried generations of hard-earned wisdom about the promises of powerful men. The compensation package is generous, continued the minister, switching to Moor when he noticed the lack of enthusiasm for his French proclamations. Each family will receive payment for their land, plus relocation assistance, plus jobs in the new economy we're building. Ibrahim stepped forward, his presence commanding attention without him needing to raise his voice. "Minister," he said in more, his words carrying the authority of a man whose roots ran deep into this soil, "we welcome development that honors our dignity. But answer this. Will our children know the stories of their ancestors when your metal birds fill the sky with noise? Will they remember the names of the spirits that live in these baobab trees when your machines turn them into runway concrete?" The Chinese engineer, a woman in her 40s who had overseen similar projects across Africa, stepped forward with her translator. "With respect, elders, this airport will connect your community to global opportunities. Your young people will have chances their ancestors never dreamed of." "Their ancestors dreamed of freedom," Ibrahim replied, his voice rising with the passion of ancestral memory. "They dreamed of dignity. They dreamed of children who would know their names and honor their sacrifices. Tell me, engineer, how does becoming a fuel stop for other people's journeys fulfill those dreams?" The tension in the air was thick as the humidity before a storm. Aminata felt caught between worlds, the traditional world of her father and the modern world of possibilities that the airport represented. She understood both languages being spoken, the language of development and the language of loss, the language of opportunity and the language of cultural survival. Maman Fatou began to chant in the old way, her voice weaving through the air like incense smoke. "Ancestors hear us, ancestors guide us. Your children stand at the crossroads of time, where the old path meets the new road, where the wisdom of ages meets the hunger of today. Speak through the wind, speak through the earth. Show us the way that honors both worlds." The minister looked uncomfortable as more villagers joined the chant, their voices creating a rhythmic tapestry that seemed to make the very air vibrate with ancient power. This wasn't going according to his carefully planned presentation. These weren't the grateful, compliant rural people his briefing documents had described. Dr. Sarah Williams, the American development consultant, had worked on similar projects from Ghana to Kenya, and she recognized the signs of serious resistance forming. In her experience, communities that invoked ancestral authority were the most difficult to manage. Their opposition came not just from economic concerns but from deep spiritual and cultural convictions that couldn't be bought with compensation packages. "Perhaps," she interjected diplomatically, "we could arrange for cultural preservation elements within the project? A museum showcasing local traditions, ceremonial spaces incorporated into the airport design." Ibrahim's laugh was bitter as the taste of red dust. "You offer us a cage to preserve our culture while you destroy the land that gave it birth? You would make us into tourist attractions, performing our traditions for travelers who stop here between more important destinations." The standoff stretched like the shadow of a baobab tree at sunset. Government officials checked their watches, thinking of return flights to Ouagadougou. International investors calculated the cost of delays and resistance. Village elders felt the weight of decision that would echo through generations. Young Aminata found herself speaking before she fully realized what she was doing. What if there was another way? All eyes turned to her, the village daughter who had studied in the capital, who understood both worlds that were colliding in this moment of historic choice. "What if," she continued, her voice gaining strength with each word, "the airport could be built in partnership with our community instead of on top of it? What if our people weren't just compensated but became true stakeholders? What if this project honored our traditions instead of erasing them?" The Chinese engineer raised an eyebrow. "What exactly are you proposing, young lady?" Aminata looked to her father, seeking permission to speak for their community. Ibrahim nodded slightly, recognizing that his daughter might hold keys to doors he couldn't even see. "The Mossi kingdoms survived for centuries by adapting without losing their essence," Aminata said, her words flowing like water finding its course. "We traded with caravans from across the Sahara without becoming Arab. We learned from the French without becoming French. We can engage with globalization without losing our souls." She gestured toward the baobab grove. "These trees are sacred not just because they're old but because they've adapted to survive. Their roots go deep, but their branches reach toward whatever conditions they face. What if the airport design incorporated these trees instead of destroying them? What if the terminals reflected our architectural traditions instead of looking like every other airport in the world?" Dr. Williams was taking notes now, recognizing potential breakthrough thinking. "Go on." "What if," Aminata continued, her voice picking up the rhythmic cadence of traditional storytelling, "instead of just building a fuel stop, we created a cultural gateway? Travelers would arrive not just at another anonymous airport but at a place where they could experience authentic Burkinabe culture, our music, our crafts, Our stories, our food prepared the traditional way. Maman Fatou was nodding now, her ancient eyes seeing possibilities in this young woman's vision. The ancestors whisper approval, she said softly. This child speaks of bridges, not walls. Minister Ouedraogo looked skeptical but intrigued. These are interesting ideas, but international airport standards require. Standards that reflect whose culture? Interrupted Ibrahim, but his tone was no longer entirely oppositional. His daughter had shown him a path he hadn't seen before, one that might honor both the ancestors and the future. The Chinese engineer was consulting rapidly with her team in Mandarin. After a few minutes, she turned back to the group. We've built airports that incorporate local cultural elements in other countries. It's technically feasible, though it would require modifications to the current design. Dr. Williams was already mentally drafting reports to her development bank. Community-centered infrastructure projects were exactly the kind of innovative approach that international donors were looking for. Development that enhanced rather than erased local culture could become a model for similar projects across Africa. But, she cautioned, this would require genuine partnership, not just consultation. The community would need to be involved in every stage of planning and implementation. Are you prepared for that level of collaboration? Ibrahim looked around at his people, farmers and herders, craftspeople and storytellers, elders carrying ancient wisdom and young people hungry for new opportunities. This was the moment when destiny revealed itself, when the course of their community's future would be set for generations to come. Our ancestors taught us that the strongest structures are built on foundations that honor the past while reaching toward the future, he said finally. If this airport project can be built on such foundations, if it can serve not just as an economic hub but as a cultural bridge that shares our heritage with the world while providing genuine opportunities for our people, then perhaps the spirits of our forebears are indeed guiding us toward a new chapter. Maman Fatou raised her walking stick and struck it against the ground 3 times, the traditional signal of momentous decision. Let it be recorded in the memory of our people that on this day, when the old path met the new road, we chose to walk forward together, carrying our ancestors' wisdom into tomorrow's possibilities. The minister smiled for the first time since arriving. So we move forward with revised plans? Community partnership approach. We move forward with respect, Ibrahim corrected. Respect for this land, respect for our traditions, respect for our people's dignity. The ancestors demand nothing less. The future deserves nothing less. As the sun began to set over the red earth of Burkina Faso, painting the baobab trees in shades of gold and amber, the gathered crowd, officials and villagers, investors and elders, dreamers and skeptics, began to imagine what an airport might look like if it were built not as a monument to foreign ambition but as an expression of African creativity and resilience. Aminata smiled as she listened to her father and the Chinese engineer discussing how traditional Mossi architectural principles might be incorporated into terminal design. The conversation was taking place in a mixture of more French and broken English, with lots of gestures and sketches in the dust, but somehow understanding was emerging. This was how real development happened, she realized, not through grand pronouncements from distant capitals, but through patient dialogue between people who shared a common commitment to building something better for their children. The drums of Lumbila province sounded different that night, their rhythm carrying across the villages like a message of hope. The ancestors, it seemed, had found a way to speak through the voices of their descendants, guiding ancient wisdom toward modern solutions. In the months that followed, the Ouagadougou International Mega Airport project would indeed shock the world, not just for its architectural innovation or its economic impact, but for proving that development could honor culture, that progress could preserve dignity, and that the dreams of communities could be larger and more visionary than the plans of governments. But that night, as the first stars appeared over the red earth where metal birds would someday nest among sacred baobab trees, the people of Lumbila province slept peacefully, knowing they had found a way to walk into the future without leaving their ancestors behind. The shock they delivered to the world was not the shock of submission to external vision, but the shock of showing that African communities could be partners, not just recipients, in shaping their own destiny. And in that shock was the seed of a new kind of development, one that grew from the roots up, rather than being imposed from the sky down. Boom bieta boom, the drums carried the message across the night, from compound to compound, village to village, generation to generation. We remain who we are, even as we become who we must be. The ancestors smiled, and the future beckoned with open arms.